Anxiety in children and teens is on the rise.
But get this, it's also on the rise for parents as well.
Are the two related? What if both parents and kids are in a cycle of worry that's just feeding off of each other?
Or could we just be talking about anxiety too much and we're all just anxious about feeling anxious?
On this episode, we'll share some of our own stories about anxiety, reflect on our fast-changing society, and talk about building a joyful home in a stressed-out world.
This is the Balanced Family Podcast with Ben.
And Jessica, there's a lot to balance when you have a family. Marriage, kids, health, career, while you're trying to balance all the opinions out there on how to do things right.
Today, we'll cut through the noise, tackle hard questions, and share stories as we try to get to the heart of the things that really matter. Today, I've decided that instead of going with my phone for my notes, I was going to use paper. And I just want to know, do I look smarter?
You definitely look more official.
Like, what if you see me, if you're looking at me, I'm talking, and I flip the page like this?
Wow.
It looks pretty smart. I know. I don't have my legal pad, but I thought about putting my legal pad with it.
That would take it up.
Yeah.
Because like only professors use legal pads. Those old school professors we used to have, they would have their legal pad.
Oh, yeah. My dad used a legal pad for everything. And I have a lot of similarities in handwriting in that you can't read it like my dad's.
Ben's legal pads are the most...
It's just a stream of awesomeness.
It's a stream of consciousness of random stuff.
That's the only paper that I like to have around. I generally like to be pretty digital. I don't like paper because I'll just won't organize it. And I was that kid with just paper all over his backpack. In his backpack, on his backpack,
Okay, well, everywhere. We're talking about anxiety, and everything you're saying to me actually brings a lot of anxiety to me thinking about. But yeah, we're talking about anxious parents raising anxious kids.
Anxious kids, yeah. In 2024, a couple notable things that happened that made me think about this topic for us. Number one, the Surgeon General, the U.S. Surgeon General, came out and made a statement about parental stress. And it was a pretty interesting statement because he talked a lot about his own personal stress as well. It was almost like he used that to inspire this public policy statement he wanted to make about that. But there's studies to back that up, that parents are more stressed out than ever, perhaps. Yeah. And then the second thing was a really, really, really popular book that came out called The Anxious Generation. Right when it came out, I bought it, read it. You read it.
I've read most of it. Yeah.
Most of it. It immediately, it resonated a lot with us. And there was stuff in that book that we applied to our parenting, and it kind of opened our eyes to some unsaid things we were feeling that it really put words around. But there's a lot of research in that book that's very striking, particularly about the effects of social media and, well, primarily social media, but just smartphones also in general. But this episode, we're not really going to talk about that. We definitely need to talk about that. I think we should have a whole episode about just our philosophy with screen time and how we've managed that and journeyed through that since our kids were really little. But most of that book is about that. But there's the first part of the book is actually more about just changes in parenting in general, specifically overprotective parenting. So before we quickly review some of the book, I do also want to mention that I've been recently reading a book called Raising Worry-Free Girls. And in that book, the author also talks about just some studies linking like anxiety in parents to anxiety in children. And it's kind of common sense. Like if you're an anxious person, it's going to pass down to your kids. And it's not that cut and dry. And there's some kids, we were just talking about earlier before that we started recording, about how some people are genetically more dispositioned toward being nervous. Disposed. Thank you. And obviously that we see that even in our relationship. I'm obviously like the really calm, like totally collected, like never gets worried about anything.
It's not true.
Not true.
It's fake news.
Yeah, I'm pretty high strung. Anyway, we've seen that. So just some of the evidence in that in our home of like our anxiousness being passed down to our kids
100%.
pretty easily.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the book, Anxious Generation. There's a lot of really amazing parts of this book, and we're not going to get into, like Ben said, the screen time aspect, but a few things that the book pointed out. Number one, there is a mental health crisis in teens. There's a sharp rise in teen anxiety, depression, and self-harm since the 2010s. And this is specifically linked to smartphones and social media, but he also makes the connection with anxiety being increased due to just a lack of childhood play opportunities and
Free play.
and
Yeah.
free play, and really just parents kind of just over parenting, being too protective of their kids. Decline in free play and social interactions hampers resilience and emotional regulation, and then also risky play. And I want to talk about risky play because I think so. Risky play would be that moment when you're watching your toddler go and do something really dangerous. I was actually over at a friend's house last night, and her toddler boy, he's 2, he was basically jumping from the couch to this cushion and like jumping off. She said he was jumping off. He has like this little car that moves, and he was literally just jumping off of it and face planting. And she let him do it one time because she was like, well, maybe he'll learn his lesson. And then she laughed when she realized that actually he just wanted to keep doing it over and over again, just kept face planting. And a lot of parents, especially in our generation, have this knee-jerk response to want to say, oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And I was reflecting on when I was a parent, I kind of knew some of this stuff, I think intuitively, maybe because I am an educator and I just know the impact of a parent's response to a child's belief about themselves and about the world. And so when my girls even would engage in risky play, it would take everything in me, but I would really try to hold back. And I remember this one time I was at the playground, and one of my girls was doing something. I can't even remember what she was doing, but she was doing something incredibly risky. And I was purposely standing far away, number one, so that she would feel the freedom to do this risky thing. And I was like, she knows her limits. She's going to be okay. But there were other parents around, and they were watching her. And I was watching all of them like, oh my gosh. They were like kind of freaking out, and we're looking around like, where is this parent?
Somebody called DHS.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was just an interesting interaction that I had at the playground that I think made me realize, I remember growing up very differently as well, which we'll get into kind of our childhoods, or maybe we could talk about it now. I remember engaging in incredibly risky play when I was little. And nowadays, I mean, playgrounds are completely designed to be 100% safe and basically remove all risky play.
Let's mention a part of that book.
Oh, yeah.
So in the book, he has pictures of playgrounds from the 70s contrasted with playgrounds today, and just the incredible removal of risk.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit extreme when you look at the stuff from the 70s. Like he shows this picture, like literally these kids are so high up, climbing on this kind of like monkey bar type structure. Like if they fall, they will die.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he wasn't saying we need playgrounds that are that, extreme, but he contrasts it with today where like they're extremely safe.
Yeah.
And I will say in the book, the evidence against smartphones and social media for kids is very convincing. Like the evidence is really good research and meta-analysis. The stuff more about overparenting is, for me, it felt a little more theoretical, but it just still resonated so much, especially just like catching the vibe of parents these days and just how kind of high strung everybody is about safety and health and toxins and everything.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be ignorant and say that parents have never worried about their kids. Like that's kind of extreme. In fact, I was watching the very first episode of Rugrats the other day because they have all the vintage Nickelodeon on Paramount Plus, and I watched the very first episode of Rugrats, and the dad in the show, this came out in 1990 or 91 or something, and he is reading the ingredients on the cereal box that his kid was eating, and he was like, there's not any real food in this thing. What are they feeding kids? So it was like people were even then thinking about some of this stuff about overprocessed food and whatnot, but that wasn't necessarily mainstream like it is now, where parents are very conscious.
Absolutely not mainstream.
Yeah.
I pretty much lived off of processed food.
Heck yeah, man.
I mean, that was 100% of my diet.
Yeah. I had one friend, his parents were like health food conscious. And I remember him, I was like, where are your snacks? And he's like, we have these crackers, they're gluten free. And I was like, what the heck is gluten? Kids nowadays, they know what gluten free and dairy free means, and, no color dyes and whatnot. Like kids know that stuff. And it's like, what is gluten free? I don't even know where he got that food. Yeah. I don't even know if we had health food store in my hometown. Anyway, so all that to say, parents have always worried. It's not that they've never worried, but it's now mainstream to worry about everything. So it seems.
It does.
So back to
It's
your
true.
childhood. Do you want to share more stories about risky play? Because you have some good ones.
I have some pretty epic risky play stories, but I want to make a quick comment. I mean, when you look back at the 90s, this isn't good. I'm not saying, oh, I'm so glad that I had for my after school snack fruit roll-ups. See, my house, we were the cool house and we had all the like best snacks.
Oh, man.
Okay.
You're
we
so
had
cool.
fruit roll-ups. We had Pop-Tarts.
Dang.
I would have Hot Pockets and
like the name brand too.
Oh yeah.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
yeah. I mean, it was great. And so, that was one part of it, but I laugh now. So I grew up doing a lot of risky play things. First of all, I would ride my bike around our neighborhood and we had this playground with a forest behind it. And in the forest, all these kids in our neighborhood had built this really epic fort, basically. And there were all kinds of shenanigans that I think went down in that fort. I was too little to understand fully, to be honest. But looking back on it, I'm like, okay. And I would also ride my bike to school. My school was probably about a mile away. It was through our neighborhood, but it was through multiple neighborhoods that were connected. And I would ride my bike to school. I have memories of riding my bike to our pool that again was in a few neighborhoods down. I had a lot of freedom in that regard, but also just a funny story. So we had growing up kind of my dad had a lake house. We had a lake house growing up. It was our version of vacation. We never went on vacations, but we would every summer go and hang out at our lake house and do the lake thing. And my dad had found this random go-kart. I don't know where he found it. Like, I guess off of the newspaper. I'm not sure. It was used, very used. And the brakes on it were a little iffy. He had put basically a brick because I was too small to actually drive the go-kart. So we put bricks on the brakes and the accelerator so I could do that. And we didn't have any kind of helmet. So he put a bike helmet on me and a life jacket. And this go-kart, the brakes would work sometimes.
Wait, the life jacket for cushioning?
Yeah, just in case.
Not because you're by the lake.
Just in case I were to fall.
Yeah.
It was
sense.
like I would not, I guess, like have any like stick.
Be impaled?
Like, impale me.
Hey.
And the brakes, they were questionable. Okay. Like sometimes they'd work, sometimes they wouldn't. And I would go flying down this hill.
Love it.
And I mean, it was just life. It was so fun. I mean, we would do so many things that, it's funny because I remind my dad of this story often because now with his grandkids, he is very precious about them.
Kind of
and
interesting.
I mean, we had a zip line that, we would like run into the tree on a regular basis. And now he installed this zip line at their house that they're at now with like this really nice spring that like ensures that our kids don't run into the tree anyway. And I'm like, Dad, come on. Like, anyway, it's just funny.
Man, we had woods behind my house, the first half of my childhood. Eventually, we kind of moved out to the country, but we had woods behind our subdivision. And yeah, I would be on the woods for like 8 hours at a time.
Yeah.
And if you went far back enough, there were these train tracks. And these train tracks, there was literally like a murder that happened. Like, it's literally on Unsolved Mysteries. It's called Boys on the Track. And this happened in my town of Bryant, Arkansas. It's actually an interesting story. There's all these conspiracies about Bill Clinton and like this like narcotics trade, and these boys might have stumbled up on this like big drug deal or something. And
you played on those train tracks.
yeah. And like we would go out there and my friend's older brother would just like, there'd be like a piece of trash and be like, yeah, that's left over from the crime scene. And yeah, we're like hanging out there where this murder happened. And that was life. I remember again, riding my bike, like you said, like so far into other neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And this was back when the Nintendo 64 days and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time came out. And like, there was this guy this kid in another neighborhood he was like the sage of Zelda. Like, he knew all the secrets. And I would just go. My parents didn't know him or his family. I would just like go to his house and watch him play Zelda to gain all these tips. And yeah, that was childhood. And then I remember when we moved out to the country, I was in the woods for like all day and riding four-wheelers and literally hunting snakes, poisonous snakes, cottonmouths, water moccasins, whatever you want to call them. And yeah, that was childhood for me. Lots of risky play that I didn't really know that it was necessarily risky. And I don't remember, we're telling these stories not to like throw our parents under the bus. It's actually kind of a good thing. I don't remember growing up with tons of warnings from them.
Yeah.
And I think about how many times that I warned my kids about safety and things. And I think about just like, what effect is that having on them and the way they view the world if I'm always reminding them of the dangers that surround them.
Yeah. And I think to play devil's advocate on what we're saying, obviously there have been terrible things that have happened. And in fact, something that we'll talk about later, but I want to bring up now is, you know, a lot of terrible things that happen to kids actually don't happen from strangers. It's actually usually trusted loved ones who engage in whatever activity might be, you know, horrible. And so I do know that there are people out there who probably are thinking, oh my gosh, you know, that's so horrible because XYZ happened to me and it was really horrible. And I think those things do happen. But what we are living inside of is a generation that has so much information and has heard so many of these stories on our news circuits and social media, and we have created an anxious generation, an anxious parenting generation, and then therefore an anxious child generation as well.
The stranger danger fear is like super real. And the statistics on crimes involving children, like it was way more dangerous to be a kid in like the 70s, for instance, than it is now. And the irony, it's actually one of the safest times to be out there, but we're so aware with news and social media, we're so aware of human trafficking and abuse stuff that goes on. And yeah, there's such a stranger danger and people don't know their neighbors. I go on my runs a lot of times in the morning. I'll run through our neighborhood at the time of the bus, before the buses get there. And next to the bus stop, there's the kids waiting. And then there's a line of cars. And it's like, what are these cars? And that's the parents in the neighborhood literally sitting in their car watching their kid
get on the
for
bus.
10 minutes before they get on the bus. And it's just really interesting. It's like, interesting. I definitely didn't see that scene, you know, growing up. I think there might have been some cases where, you know, especially if it's far away or it's like a super long wait, but right here in this like super safe neighborhood, it's kind of interesting.
It is interesting.
So real quick, he talks about just some of the effects of that, a lack of free play and risky play. And also the impact it has on social interactions, that our social interactions are so managed by adults now. And we kind of talked about in a previous episode about gentle parenting and like trying to help kids navigate their emotions and stuff like that. Sometimes, and he describes how in social interactions, we're trying to manage everybody's feelings so well that they actually don't figure out how to work through those relationships on their own.
Right.
Their conflict. It hampers resilience. And it hampers emotional regulation and dealing with their own fears. They're not able to develop coping skills. And then he talks about the transition to puberty and then to adulthood. And that's when the book transitions more to smartphones, social media, that basically it's like delaying maturity in kids because they're more engaged in the digital world than the real world. Before we talk about maybe some of the theories on why this overparenting has evolved like this, did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay.
I want to get into why parenting has become so anxiety ridden, some of the theories behind that.
Which one do you want to talk about first?
I do want to talk about number one, perceived increase in danger, which we hinted on just a second ago. But I think that there is a perception that the world is really dangerous. And I think that one thing that the book said that really clicked in me is that actually the most dangerous place for kids is social media and the internet. That actually the world is actually the best place for your kid to fail and, you know, encounter conflict and have adult interactions that are difficult for them and all of that. That actually our world today, like we talked about, is safer than what it was. I just saw on social media the other day that there was a guy in a Goodwill parking lot. This was on like one of our local Facebook groups that I'm a part of. And he came up to this mom and was asking her about, he asked her name and what she does for a living and her kids' names or something like that. And she was basically just posting on social media, hey, this guy was in the Goodwill parking lot. He gave me the creeps. Everyone hide your kids, hide your wife, kind of a thing. Like, it was like, you know, there's a lot of danger out there. We don't know who this guy was. He gave her the creeps, but
Sounds like a
who
creeper.
knows? Yeah, he might have been a creeper. He might not have been. He might have been trying to, I don't know, sell some product. I mean, like, we don't know. And I don't know this person. I don't know, is she a drama mama? Maybe she is, maybe she's not. So I think, but in general, then, looking at the comments on that post, it was just like, everyone was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. They've got the pitchforks and they've got a mob
Ready to
together
go.
going on a manhunt.
And the reality is, and this is just statistically, like it is much safer now than it was 30, 40 years ago. And so much of this is perpetuated by our social media, by the news always posting every random person that is shooting up someone or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of our digital world that is perpetuating a lot of this.
Yeah. Thinking about this second point about a decline in community trust and an increase in individualism. So there's such an individualistic view in our culture, especially here in the US, just for you individually, but that translates to your family, where it's just like about my family, what we think, what we do. And there's so much validity to that and taking personal responsibility for your family. But throughout most of human history, your family, even identity, fit into the context of some kind of communal society or village, or going back as far as like kinships, and is how people groups form before like modern nations. And that affects things a lot. Like, we do not really know our neighbors. We don't really interact much. Your social circle is the people that you connect with online or through your chosen channels, like a church, community, or your relatives or whatever. And so there's just no sense of like community cohesion. And, I wrestle with that because, not to be rude, but I don't really have this strong interest to know all my neighbors in my neighborhood, because there's just limited time here on earth. And I know the relationships that I want to invest in. And I think about how kind of weird it is. It's like, I don't actually know the people I live next to.
Yeah. But well. I think it's interesting though, because, we talk about this all the time. We struggle with letting our girls go hang out with the neighborhood kids and go into their house because of the digital and social media. Kids are having smartphones completely unsupervised at like age 8. And it's like, I'm sorry, like, we're not going to have our girls go over to your house and watch TikTok.
Yeah,
like, they don't even know hardly what TikTok is. That feels dangerous to me. So I do struggle with this one, because I know what they're saying in that, like, yes, we don't have a village. I'm talking about society in general, gotcha. Just that, a long time ago, it was common for kids to have multiple caregivers beyond just their parents. True. They would have grandparents, they would have aunties and uncles and people in their town. It wasn't uncommon for multiple people to come, and kids would kind of be carted around. We have a particular group in Northwest Arkansas called the Marshallese, and they're an island people.
South Pacific Island.
I won't get into all the history of why they're in Northwest Arkansas, but they are incredibly communal. And it's not uncommon for teachers to literally not know who the parents are of the kids, because people are just passing the kids around. And anyway, all that to say.
Because the islands are so small and everybody knew each other.
Everybody knows each other. Yeah. And so I think it's an interesting thing to look at. But I do struggle with it a bit personally.
Yeah. And we have a village. We have relationships through our church and very close friends that, like, we can trust the parents. We have a village. We have strong relationships. It's just, it's no longer based geographically. It's kind of like, that's fine. But in the context of what we're talking about anxiety in parents and how it's linked to anxiety in kids. Well, what happens is, like, their parents are constantly anxious because they don't trust any of the people, like, physically in proximity to them.
That's very true.
Next one. This is a big topic. The social pressures that we feel nowadays as parents. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'll just read off this first line because I think it's good. Fear of failure. Anxiety about failing as a parent or being judged harshly for parenting decisions can drive overprotectiveness. And that is so true, because, like, back to my playground thing that happened to me, I'm letting my kids engage in risky play. I'm watching all these parents know that they're judging me. They're like, where is this mom? Why is she not watching her toddler? And there was one time my daughter, one of my little girls, fell from a pretty high point at the playground. She was fine, thankfully. And that is the risk of risky play. It's called risky play for a reason. It is risky. And I was standing far enough away that I couldn't get to her quick enough to ensure that she didn't fall, but I was pretty quick. Had my eye on her. And in that moment I felt really judged, and I had to actively choose to not let that change my parenting.
Mm-hmm.
To say, hey, this was one time out of 1,000 that I let my kids engage in risky play. They climb trees, they do things, and I'm not there hovering over them. And I do that on purpose. It required a lot of like internal work for me to not feel incredibly embarrassed and judged and like, oh my gosh, I'm such a horrible parent. I can't believe that happened. I am there. Like, I get it. But I think that when we look at not creating anxious children, like, and when she fell, I was like, okay, my response right now is really important. If I go over and am like, oh my gosh, and I'm just like freaking out, and I know that my little girl is going to feed into that.
Right.
And she's going to all of a sudden be really afraid of height. I knew that. This was before Anxious Generation came out. I had made that connection. And so I went over really calmly and I was like, oh no, you fell.
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay? And, she's crying, of course, because she fell, but I'm really calm and I'm looking her over and I'm like checking her out. Does she have a broken bone? Is she okay? She was fine. And I got her up, I gave her a big hug, and I did say, let's be careful. Now, don't go there. I think it's really important. And this particular child still engages in risky play to this day. So, yeah.
Man, there's so much social pressure on parents now. Women are more involved in their kids' life than ever. Plus they're working. Dads are this is the most involved generation of fathers like ever. But when they ask them if they feel like they're doing enough, like no parent feels like they're doing enough. And I don't know if there's ever been in history a generation of parents that were like, yep, perfect, nailed it. We've done everything right. This kind of the nature of parenting is you always are feeling like there's more to do. But just like the literal, just like weightiness of so much that's going on, the things you got to manage with health and diet and hydration and safety. And we just have a culture obsessed with like minimizing risk. It's in our legal culture in the United States of just mitigating all risk and finding people to blame that might have increased the risk of an accident. And it's just the way our culture is built. And so I think there's just like this subconscious sense of liability we carry as parents that if I turn my head for one moment and my kid gets injured, it's my fault. And you have to really like psychoanalyze that. It's like, is it really my fault? Is that really a realistic expectation to have on myself as a parent, that if my kid getting injured or not is up to me? And of course there's a responsibility within reason, but the truth is like this world is risky. And that's something just we wrestle with as parents. It starts when your kids are little, you're kind of managing that internally. And it happens when you're releasing them into adulthood. Like this world always has dangers and risks.
Yeah. I think another thing that I see a lot with minimizing risk are just the technologies that we have, the tech, all the baby monitors. And listen, I know I'm going to probably ruffle some feathers. Okay. But there are particular baby monitors out there, that will sound an alarm if a baby's breathing, baby stops breathing. It will do all these different things. There's one that's like, I think it's like a sock. There's different ones.
Yeah.
We actually have had like that brand reach out before. And I just actually won't promote it. And the reason why is because when I dug into it and I looked at the data, it actually is not effective. It is not actually effective in reducing, for example, SIDS or other things. The jury's still out, number one. And number two, what it does do is it massively increases parental anxiety.
Exactly.
Because you're sleeping and you're constantly listening for that alarm. And you're worried that you won't hear that alarm. I know that this also happens even just if your baby is next to you. I hear a lot of moms who talk about like, I had a really hard time sleeping because I was afraid my baby was going to stop breathing and all I would do is listen to their breathing. And here's what I'm going to say to that. I don't think that we need a technology for that.
Yeah.
I think that those moms need help. And I don't mean that in a mean way. Like you need help, like you're terrible.
Yeah, right.
What I mean is like, that's actually postpartum anxiety.
Yeah.
That's a diagnosable condition that happens. It's hormonal. It's not your fault. It's not that you're a bad person or a bad mom. I had postpartum anxiety. I didn't have it around breathing. I had it around baby sleep. There's lots of reasons to have anxiety as a mom.
Yeah.
And when you are postpartum, your hormonal changes just massively increase that. And so we don't need more technology.
Yeah.
We need more support. We need more people helping
People in
us.
our lives.
People in our lives
Not
telling
tech
us
in our lives.
telling us, hey, I love you so much. That's not normal to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
worrying about that. You need to get some sleep. Let me help you work through
Or
this.
like-
But honestly, companies are predatory and they want to make
Yeah.
a buck, and
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
going to create something
Fear.
that is going to, quote, help you with your anxiety. And it actually only increases it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that continues then as you keep going, because then we have a lot of parents give their kids smartphones when they're really young for the purpose of keeping them safe, right?
Yeah, that's
It's
the rationale.
and I mean, Lord knows, yes, like school shootings and all of that. I get it. But again, you are, and this goes into the book, and we're not
And
talking about screen time.
He has a lot of good.
But,
he has a
like-
lot of good solutions
Yeah.
for the rationale people have of just like, oh, are they supposed to be safe?
Right.
And he's pretty bold in the book. Like he talks about sending his kid without a phone, walking down Manhattan to go buy groceries.
Yep.
Like an 8-year-old or something like.
Like you and I did.
Yeah,
Because
like
we would
I did
go
stuff like
to the
that.
pool
Yeah.
without a phone
Yeah,
because there were no such thing as cell phones.
exactly. We did
When I was a kid.
Exactly. When you were talking about the tech and all the safety mechanisms we have, when you were talking, I was thinking like, you know what? All of those brands, and again, a lot of those brands doing hard work, and their intent is to help us take care of our kids. Totally get it. There's a lot of stories of how it saved a baby's life.
True.
And that's totally valid. But what I think about is, and again, I'm not saying you should never have any of that tech, but for every one kid whose life is saved from that, there's 1,000 other kids that's totally normal and their parents are filled with all this anxiety and they're just obsessive.
It's obsessive.
It's obsessive. And you wouldn't know this about me, and we'll talk about it on another episode, but like I have a thing or two to say about anxiety because I was a clinically diagnosed obsessive compulsive disorder child and young man. And finally, as a young man, was able to have massive breakthrough and victory in that part of my life and no longer an issue. But like, I know what it's like to obsess over things to the point where it becomes a disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Just nothing in our society, including tech, is doing any favors for parents on trying to keep them from being obsessive. So anyway, last thing we want to talk about was a really interesting New York Times article.
Oh, yeah.
This also came out last year. And it's called, Are We Talking Too Much About Mental Health by Ellen Berry. And we don't have to go super in depth into it, but moral of the story of that article is we need a balance in how we even talk about mental health with children. And there's some studies suggesting that actually there's an overemphasis, and we talked about this in the gentle parenting episode, there's an overemphasis and too much talking about these issues to where kids are self-diagnosing themselves like crazy. And it's like making the problem worse. If a kid is moody, they're being fed information that makes them think they might be in depression.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to like, dude, like most kids are pretty moody and go through some different things. So it's interesting in our culture, there actually are legitimate rises in a lot of the mental health issues, but there's also like this rise in just like self-diagnosing. And if you think about a child's brain, when I say child, I'm also talking about adolescents and teens, it's not a fully formed brain. And kids are designed to like learn from adults and take cues from adults. And as you experience with a parent, like kids can easily blow things out of proportion. Like if you say anything about a thunderstorm wrongly,
This may or may not have happened a couple weeks
especially
ago.
when you live where we live, kind of in Tornado Alley, like there will be paranoia if you do not present the situation correctly.
Yeah. We had a tornado hit somewhat close to our house. I mean, it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a little north of us, but for a little while, we thought it was actually heading right for us.
Yeah.
So, we had to make preparations, and that caused some anxiety.
Yeah. There's
in
ways you
our
present
children.
that
One child was exhilarated.
yeah. There's ways you present that go from like, there was a tornado in our town versus a tornado almost went over our house and killed us all.
Yeah.
Which is like where a child's brain to go. So relating to mental health, like that article kind of gives you this idea. If we already have evidence, strong evidence in psychology that parents' anxiety about health can actually lead to hypochondria in children, why could that link not be happening in mental health as well?
It's true.
So parents are stressed out and they're talking about their mental health and they're going to therapy, which is great. I've experienced therapy. It massively helped me, but it's about how how often we talk about it, how we talk about it with kids and worry about kids. Parents are diagnosing their kids, early on. I mean, it's very typical as teachers. I remember like the second a kid is struggling with attention, it's like immediately the
ADHD.
Think they have ADHD and all this.
The new one is now autism.
Autism. Well, I would say the new one. That's been a big theory that everybody thinks the kids have autism. And again, there's legitimate cases. And
absolutely.
And
I was a special ed teacher.
Yeah,
so
you were.
I absolutely know about this.
And there's reasons to intervene early.
Early intervention is amazing. But, the signs are real clear.
Yeah.
For most kids, if they have severe enough autism, that early intervention would be impactful. And so I think just releasing the pressure of parents, I think is really important.
This whole link about like the way parents talk about health as well as mental health and how kids react. It reminds me of one year I was working at a summer program and we did this, it was middle schoolers, and we did this field trip and we were visiting the Walmart headquarters. So in our town, we live where
field trip to
well,
Walmart.
It had a context with it, and we were meeting with a woman, and she was talking about
becoming like an entrepreneur.
Yeah, something like that. Or I don't know, women in the workplace. I can't even remember. We live at the Walmart global headquarters, and we were
Walmart. If you're listening, we would love to partner with you.
yeah. Here we go. Anyway. Well, we were walking. It was like one of those hot summer days and then you get like a fake rain, like it kind of like rains a little bit, but doesn't really. It was like super humid, and we were walking across the parking lot. And when it does that across like asphalt, it creates kind of that steamy, stinky asphalt smell, which I'm like totally used to and kind of in a weird way, kind of like it. I don't know why. It's kind of like why some people like the smell of gasoline. But anyway, the kids were freaking out, literally freaking out, not joking around, like, ugh, they were literally like, oh my gosh, there's got to be so many toxins in this air. Oh my gosh, I can smell it. I mean, all of them.
I didn't even know what toxins were.
I didn't even know that word. Yeah, as a middle schooler.
So funny.
And so is it good to remove toxins from our diet? And is it good to be aware of that stuff? Absolutely. But what is the effect that the language you craft around that in your home affect? How is that affecting your kids? It's the same thing with mental health. You got to be very careful the way you talk about even that phrase mental health when you work with your kids through emotional and social issues.
Or even talk about your own problems.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of parents, now it's like when I was a new mom, I struggled a lot I had definitely had some mental health issues, and I struggled a lot mostly just with anger and just kind of, parenting 3 kids under 4, being a stay-at-home mom. One of them has a diagnosis. I just was dealing with a lot and definitely had a lot of angry outbursts. And, I think it wasn't until, I have 2 things to say about it, but I'll say this first. It wasn't really until I worked on myself that I was able then to model correct behavior in front of my children. And I think to your point about mental health, because I was watching my kids be very emotional.
Yeah.
Too. Like we were feeding off of one another. It wasn't a great relationship in that way whenever I was a young parent. And, do I blame myself? No, I've had to forgive myself for some of it, because I do know that some of our kids just, they're a little emotional. Could it have been because of me? Potentially. I think that I chose in those moments to really do the deep internal work inside of myself to deal with my just postpartum hormones, to deal with some of my anxiety. I wouldn't say I was depressed. I was just more anxious. And that I have seen since that point when I really dealt with a lot of that. And I did go to therapy as well. It has been like night and day in terms of my ability to manage my own emotions. But the way that I talked about some of that too was really important, because I would always go and apologize.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sitting there having like this therapy session with my child. It was like, hey, I got really angry and I shouldn't have gotten angry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Will you please forgive me? Done.
Yeah.
And, and I think how we frame that is really important for children, for them to understand, because what we don't want is for our kids to go into the shame cycle then about their own mental health, because that's a lot of, or too much rumination. That was one thing that the New York Times article talked about.
Too much
was
rumination.
That a lot of kids just, they ruminate over their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions and their depression, and they're just thinking about it and thinking about it. And like, it's so important for parents to model how to recognize okay, I'm dealing with blank emotion, change, and then repair.
Yeah.
But repair doesn't mean sit and have a therapy session. Repair means acknowledge you're wrong, say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? And then move on with joy.
Yeah, exactly.
And not feel shameful and then try to overcompensate. You know what I mean? Like there's so many responses you could have.
You mentioned that you just slipped in the word joy. When I reflect on our journey as parents and like this issue and how we've matured, it's like we've gone from being concerned about protection and safety and how can we be the protector and health secretary of the home to now the question we are asking ourselves, like, how do we be a source of joy and peace for our kids that we want to see inside of them? And that's something I don't think we ask enough as parents because we're so concerned and worried about everything turning out okay. But what will happen in that process of worrying so much is that you're transferring a viewpoint of life and the world to your kids that is based in fear. And so I just thought that was really powerful, Jess. The more we deal with our fears, the deepest fears we have, even about like legitimate stuff, like about being in parenthood, the more we deal with those fears, come to personal wholeness, the more we're able to actually walk our kids through the natural fears that are going to happen inside of this world. And so we have to be absolute pillars of stability inside of the home.
Yep. And that starts with us.
It starts with us. It starts with us.
Yep.
Your anxiety will pass to your kids, just like your joy and your peace, your happiness will pass to your kids as well.
I think the last thing that I'll add on to that too is that finding a community, I think, is so important.
Yes.
And having people around you that not only help you as an individual be able to have peace and joy and just people I mean, we talked about this before in the podcast, but we have some different couples that we go to on a very regular basis to talk about parenting issues.
Yeah.
Someone just to bounce things off of, hey, should I make a big deal about this? Hey, my kids said this. I'm kind of freaking out right now, or this happened. What should we do? I think that honestly is invaluable and finding your people to be able to do that. But then also having other people have input into your children.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of having multiple caregivers. And we have even ladies inside of our community who take our girls and go do fun things with them and have inputs with them. I think that that's also really important and shows, hey, you live in a safe place. You can open up to other people. You can share about your anxiety and have someone else be able to have a positive input that's not your parent, not us. I think all of that stuff is just incredibly important with community life.
Just like real person-to-person relationships.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
That's it. All right. Let's all go forth and do the internal work.
Let's do it. Become sources of joy and peace in our homes.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening today. It would mean so much to us if you left a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you heard this.
And let us know your thoughts on today's episode by leaving a comment on Spotify or YouTube, where you can also watch these episodes.